In this screencast, we're going to examine vision. And one of the things I will tell you is that as far as how the eye works, we're not going to go into extreme detail, not in regular psych. We will do that in AP, but if you want to read up on it, if you're interested in that stuff, obviously the book covers a lot of it. Now, we will talk a little bit about it here. One thing we need to talk about as far as vision, first of all, how important it is. Experts kind of estimate that of all the things we take in through all of our senses on a day-to-day basis, about 80% comes in through your eyes. And as it comes in through the eyes, it comes in and it goes back, and the image, the light that comes in, goes back and it focuses or lands back here on the retina. The retina is the back part of the eyeball, okay? And that retina consists of a variety of receptor cells. And those receptor cells are called rods and cones. Now, we have about 120 million receptor rods back there, and cones, there's about 6 million of those back there in the back part of the retina of the eye. So tiny microscopic cells, but these allow us to see in terms of various colors and shapes. Now, what do rods and cones do? Rods are used for nighttime vision. Rods are used to kind of see shapes. They tend to see dark colors. If you get up in the middle of the night and you're walking down the hallway and to use the restroom and there's no lights on, you can still see where things are without too big of a problem. Now, as far as telling colors, rods don't help you very well. Okay, rods don't see color, but they do see shapes and basically deep colors. Cones, on the other hand, cones, you have to have a lot of light for those to operate, and cones, you do see color. So the bright colors of daylight, that sort of thing. That's the purpose of rods and cones. Now, how do you tell the difference? I actually have it's kind of a stupid mnemonic device that I use, but just think of it this way. When you go out at night, especially ladies, you go out at night, it's kind of scary, and you're not sure who's going to jump out at you from, around behind, bushes or around the corner. So you take a rod with you for protection. And if somebody jumps out at you, you hit them, with that rod. So rods are for nighttime vision. Cones, in the middle of a summer day, bright and beautiful, all the colors, you go get you an ice cream cone and you have them put little colorful sprinkles on top. And that just helps you remember that cones are for daytime vision. Cones see colors. Next thing is adaptation. And adaptation is the process of becoming less sensitive to a stimulus the more continuously you're exposed to it. So, for example, if you jump in the pool and the water's ice cold, but now you're in it for several minutes, your body adapts to it. Same thing with like a bad smell or odor or a train noise. The more you're around it, your body adapts to it. So in terms of vision, it's the same thing in terms of lightness and darkness. The more you're in darkness, your body adapts to it. It becomes basically the rods take over. The more you're in bright light, the cones begin to take over. It's kind of interesting if you think of like a sunrise and a sunset. If you imagine those in your mind, you probably have a couple different pictures. But in reality, you're still seeing the sun at essentially the same place, compared to the horizon and so on. But when the sun comes up in the morning, we picture it as much brighter, and we picture a lot of yellows and oranges and bright reds, because our cones are beginning to take over, and the rods are basically going to sleep during the day. Not going to sleep, but they're not being relied upon. Whereas when the sun is going down at night, now your cones are less effective. The rods are taking over. Rods are more sensitive to deeper, darker colors. So you kind of perceive that the sunset is a darker color. You picture more blues and purples and things of that nature. So, and yet in reality, it's the same stimulus for the most part. The other thing here on this slide, color blindness. Color blindness, if you take a look, there's a little test you can test yourself if you never have on page 99. Color blindness is not the greatest term to use. Technically, we should probably use a term like color deficient. Most people are not color blind. Most people can see colors. It's just certain colors that they may not be able to see. The most common being red-green color blindness, which is kind of interesting considering that that's 2 out of the 3 colors on a stoplight. But that, I guess we weren't thinking too well then. Now, color blindness tends to affect males much more frequently than females. And I'll show you why here real quick. If you take a look at these letters down here, okay, we know that an XY represents a male chromosomes, okay, the XX chromosomes represent a female. It just so happens that the recessive trait of color blindness is found on the lower right hand side of the X, okay, this lower leg of the X. It's found down here, okay? Now, let's take a female, for example. If a female gets the color blindness gene from mom or dad, okay, well then the female has another X with a lower leg that she probably will have the dominant gene to be able to see color. So very few females are colorblind. Only about 1% of females tend to be colorblind. Males, however, if we get the recessive trait for color blindness on this lower leg of the X, we literally, on the other chromosome, we have no leg to stand on. Okay? Therefore, guys tend to experience color blindness much more so than females. About 8 to even 10% right in there of the population of men tend to be color deficient or colorblind. Okay, and it's something you're born with. Now, if you think about it, who gave you the gene for color blindness? Well, there's only one person that could have. We know that the Y chromosome, the only person that can give us a Y is our dad, because he's the only one that has a Y. So the X chromosome that contains the deficient or recessive trait over here, that had to be given to us from our mothers. So if a male is colorblind, the reason for that is coming from the mom. Not to, damage the relationships here or anything like that, but that's where it comes from. Continuing with vision, let's talk about distance and depth perception. I would ask you take a look at your textbook, Module 6, Section E. It's very easy to understand, and it goes through several different examples. But in terms of distance and depth perception, we pick up different things based on whether, one reason, I guess, let's put it this way, is because we have binocular vision. That means we have 2 eyes. And our eyes are spaced apart enough that when we look at something, it gives us 2 different images that we're actually seeing. And so because of those 2 images, we actually kind of get different things into our brain, and our brain perceives that depth perception in various ways. Now, the other thing is that we can look at various things in a picture or what have you, and also determine things about depth. For example, movement. We perceive things that are moving very quickly to be close to us. Like if you're driving and you see the little dashed yellow lines down, and they seem to be flying by. Well, that's because they're close to us and we perceive them as being close. On the other hand, you're going the same speed, you look out in the distance and the old farmer's barn, it just seems like it takes you forever to go past it on the highway. Well, again, we perceive things differently. So it's those kind of experiences that cause our brain to interpret things that way. Things that are going by really fast, we tend to perceive them to be closer to us. Texture. If you look at this eyeball down here in the left-hand corner, there's a lot of texture that you can see with that eyeball. And so we perceive that eyeball to be close to us. On the other hand, people who are in art, they learn very quickly. You know, things that you're going to put in the background, of the picture, you don't put as much texture with it. The linear perspective. We can also look at this road as being an example of the linear perspective as well. You know, down the road takes up more room at the bottom of the page because it's closer to us. It's more spread out. But the further away it goes from us, it tends to go into a single point. If you think about driving to Florida and you're going through Tennessee, the mountains, if you look from a distance, you would never know that there was an entire highway that cuts through the mountains there because you can't see it. But the closer you get, all of a sudden the mountains tend to part away and there's a huge highway that goes right between the mountains. Optical illusions. Won't talk about this much, but optical illusions are false visual perceptions. If you look in Module 6, Section F, there's some awesome pictures that you can use. And if you look at these, if you just hit pause and look at these pictures, you're going to notice that if you stare at them long enough, all of a sudden they will flip and you'll perceive them as being like facing a totally different direction, or maybe going up or going down. But take just a few minutes and look at those. They're very interesting. There's other examples in your textbook. Perceptual tendencies. This is the last thing we'll look at in this screencast. And that is the notion that we inherently kind of judge certain things based on some Gestalt principles, okay? Gestalt psychology, remember, looks at how we perceive things. And when things are kind of close together or grouped in certain ways, or if they're similar, we tend to group them together. Let's look at some of these examples real quick. For example, figure ground. When we picture anything, when we look at any picture, we see part of it as the figure in the picture. So like here, we would see maybe a vase as the figure and everything else the background. But if we switch and we look at the dark areas as the figure and the white as the background, now we see two faces that are facing one another, and what we called a vase a minute ago, that white is just basically the background. Proximity. The closer things are together, we tend to group them together. So like here, instead of seeing 6 separate lines, we actually see 3 sets of 2 lines. Do you see how that's different? Okay, perception-wise, that's a little different way to look at it. Similarities, we tend to group the triangles and then the circles together. So we see, 2 columns of triangles and 1 of circles. Continuity, we see like one string that tends to extend all the way through this line, this straight line, as opposed to seeing little bitty cutout parts of this that wouldn't make sense to our brain. Connectedness. Those little bars in between the circles have connected these things for us and we perceive them that way. Down here, if you look at this picture, do you see a cube? If so, you're strange because there's no cube there. There's lines, there's blank lines that gives us the indication of a cube. But the other thing you'll notice is that it's not even fully put together, but our brain fills in those missing gaps. Okay, let's stop at this point.